Hi everyone! Today we're going to do an art project which I believe is common for middle school art, which I had never heard of before I became an art teacher. We are going to do sculptures with toilet paper. I knew I wanted to do avocado toast with a fried egg, so I started with my drawing. You're going to need water and toilet paper. You probably won't need 2 rolls. I only really needed probably 1 to do all of the objects that I had, maybe even less. So you're going to start with just making the volume of the inside of the shape that you want. I'm starting with my fried egg, so I'm making my yolk with just kind of a little, maybe like half circle or a blob kind of shape. And then you'll see that I'm using the water to kind of close it up on the back and to kind of mold it into the shape that I want. But in this stage, you don't want to use too much water, because if you use too much water, it can kind of dissolve in your hands. So just use a little tiny bit of water, just as much as you need to get it to hold its shape and to mold the toilet paper, but not so much that it's going to fall apart. Now I'm doing the white part around the yolk. I'm tearing it with my hand so that it looks kind of that organic shape that it is. You don't have to be too exact, because regular fried eggs don't look super exact either. And I'm sure that whatever kind of food you're doing also doesn't look picture perfect all the time. Okay, so after I got my egg white to be the shape that I want, I'm using a little bit of water to kind of glue the top part to the bottom part. So I'm putting a little bit on my yolk, a little bit on my white, and then I'm putting it together. And this isn't going to make it stay. You're going to see that I'm taking some toilet paper and wetting it completely, and then laying it over the top to kind of help the shape stay together a little bit more too. And this is also going to get rid of the separation between the egg yolk and the egg white to make it look like it's attached. And then you just keep adding little tiny bits of water and just tapping it and shaping it gently. Be very careful, because if you're too rough with it, it can tear. But as long as you go slow and are pretty gentle with it, it's going to be fine. I'm using one of my scrap pieces of toilet paper to fill a hole that I accidentally made next to my yolk. And then I'm just tapping it in place again. I'm folding the edges under so that they don't have that hard papery texture. And that's my egg done. So now I'm moving on to my avocado slices. These took a little bit of practice, because my egg yolk kind of started out being a round shape attached to a flat shape. My toast, which you'll see later, is basically a square, a flat square. But these avocado shapes were a little bit more challenging. So I started by kind of doing little like curved shapes and then covering them up with more and more thin pieces of wet toilet paper. Eventually that did work, but I had to mess with it a little bit. So whatever shapes you're making, don't be afraid to experiment, to move things around a little bit, and to keep tweaking your shape until it looks like how you want it to. I used the table to flatten the edges of my avocado. And then I just kept adding more and more thin pieces of wet toilet paper. Wet the toilet paper gently. I'm not soaking it, I'm just using the water from my fingers. I've also seen people have success with using a spray bottle. So if you have an empty spray bottle or one that's filled with just water, you might try that as well. But I just use my fingers. I'm using my loop headphones thing to make the little divot in the inside where the avocado seed would have been. You'll see me do that later as well. After this, I got a cutting mat to put on the bottom because I realized that the white toilet paper on my white table was a little bit hard to see. And yes, it took me this long to figure it out. But once I did, I'm now working on my third avocado slice. And you'll see that the procedure that I used for this is really similar to the way that I did the first one and the second one, which I ended up not including in this video because it was really just kind of a redo of the first one. But by this time I kind of had my procedure down, so I kind of knew what shape to start out with, and I kind of knew how to wrap it so that it would get that kind of avocado slice shape. This one did end up being the biggest of the three, but I think that's okay. Using my headphones again to make the little divot. It's okay that not all of the avocado slices are the same shape and size because in real life that doesn't happen all that much either. Okay, now I'm doing my toast. I'm testing out the size to make sure that the slices will fit, and now I'm just kind of adding more and more padding on the inside of what's going to be the inside to give it enough thickness to be a piece of toast. And once I have the shape on the inside that I like, I'm going to start sticking it together with these thin pieces of wet toilet paper. I'm just gently folding it over the top, folding it over the sides, and then I'm using my table again to flatten out the edges. So like before, just keep adding the thin pieces of toilet paper to get it to stick together until you have the shape and size that you want. I'm using my fingers to give the bread that little like indent in the top insides to give it that bread shape. And then I'm just going to keep messing with it and patting sides down and adding water where I need to until it looks like how I want it to look. Now, after you make all of your pieces, you are going to have to give it some time to dry. I made my pieces on a Friday, and then I let them dry over the weekend. So I do recommend giving it a few days so that your sculptures can dry before you paint them. They need to be painted, or they need to be completely dry before you can paint them, especially if you're using watercolors, but probably if you're using any paint. Alright, this guy's done, so I just put them off to the side for the weekend and let them dry. And this is how they looked when they were fully sculpted and waiting to be painted. I then broke out my watercolors to paint my sculptures. It was a little bit of a learning curve with the watercolors because the toilet paper doesn't really allow you to blend. It kind of soaks up the water almost immediately. So you have to use a light touch. You have to use more water than you think you want to, but again, not too much because you don't want to make your sculpture fall apart. I started on the back of my piece of toast because that way I kind of had an opportunity to learn how to use the paint on the toilet paper before I had to do any of the parts that were visible. So this ended up being my least favorite painted area of my sculpture, but it doesn't look horrible, and it was a good opportunity to learn how to work with the paint. One thing that I noticed also is that you can't press too hard with the brush. You have to be very, very light with it. I got to the point where I was almost patting the color into the toilet paper instead of brushing it on. If you are somebody that does makeup, you might do that when you're putting on powders and stuff, but it is a little bit different than how you normally paint. I did my crust in a dark brown, and I tried to make the bread a kind of golden brown with some of the little browner areas. I left the edges white. You'll see that I put the crust color a little bit in, and then I left a space between the crust color and the toasted bread color. I did use a reference to paint all of my pieces, which I highly recommend. I had a picture of toast up while I was painting this toast. I had pictures of avocado slices up while I was painting the avocado slices, and I had a picture of a fried egg up while I was painting the fried egg. And anytime you're painting something realistic, I very much recommend using a reference. It can be really helpful to see what colors you need when you're painting if you have a picture of something real right next to you. A couple of things that I thought about doing that I didn't get to during this video are, you might have noticed on my sketch at the beginning, I had little faces on my food sculptures. I did kind of want to do them a little more cartoony than I ended up doing them, but I ended up doing more of a realistic style, and then when I was done, I just didn't want to risk putting on the little faces. But I might try doing this again and painting it in a slightly more cartoony style now that I know what I'm doing a little bit better than I had at the beginning. The other thing that I thought about doing that I might still do is to put a clear coat of varnish on my sculptures to give them a little bit more stiffness and to protect them from the elements a little bit. They are just toilet paper with watercolors on them. So I have Mod Podge. I might paint them with Mod Podge to protect them a little bit. If you don't have Mod Podge, there's a lot of other generic brands of clear varnish that you can use. You should also be able to use PVA glue, which is Elmer's school glue. PVA glue can work a lot of times in the place of Mod Podge. So if you don't have any specific varnishes or decoupage liquids, you should use liquid school glue. That's pretty much all of the advice that I have, so for the rest of this video, just enjoy watching me finish painting my sculptures, and if you get a chance, you should try some of your own. I can't wait to see what you make. Thank you for joining me today. For more kid-friendly art projects, please see my second channel, Miss Jana's Art Class. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. See you next time!